After studying this module, you shall be able to understand importance of emotions in one's life, learn to use emotions constructively, understand the concept of emotional competence and how it acts as a capital, skills comprising emotional competence, and appreciate cultural differences in emotional competence. Introduction. Emotions have the power to drive us and determine our actions. Emotions can grip us to do wrong or right. Yet, we don't always indulge in what our feelings push us to. This is because humans are rational beings who think before they act. We use various strategies to channelize and manage our emotions most effectively. This is an art and could be labeled as a skill. Skill is referred to as an ability of an individual to express his or her inner feelings is known as emotions are called emotional competence. It acts as a very valuable capital to individuals. We are taught to suppress negative emotions, but what we need to learn is to build emotional competence wherein, rather than suppression of emotions, we learn to manage emotions and deal ours and others effectively for a quality communication and quality life. What is emotional competence? Emotional competence is one's ability to successfully and effectively express and lead. It is considered as an important social skill to identify, understand, and respond appropriately to the feelings of one and others. One could define it as an ability to comprehend and regulate one's emotions. This would involve one knowing how to nourish one's emotional states, learn to delay gratification, and cope with any failure or loss. It also includes knowing how to control one's impulses, using a good judgment, and adapt to emotions in response to others' emotions and reactions. The concept of emotional competence explains that emotions are important, useful, and very normal, contrary to the view that considers emotions as irrational. Even emotions like anger, grief, anxiety, etc. can serve useful functions. The only deal is to express emotions at an appropriate time and place, taking into consideration the significant others. These are the trademarks of an emotionally competent person. An emotionally competent individual doesn't suppress his or her emotions, but channelizes them effectively. It is believed by many psychologists that continuous suppression of emotions can be psychologically distressing for the individual and can leave him or her disturbed and troubled in his or her memories. This could further or, in addition, lead to difficulty in processing emotional cues from others and having emotionally apt behavior for oneself. Many a times, suppressed childhood emotions, when triggered by new situations in adulthood, can result in emotionally appropriate emotions. Thus, it becomes important for parents, child, and teacher to enter co-counseling and teach the child the emotionally appropriate response rather than suppression of emotions. It can also be said that emotional competence can lead to better well-being by inducing more positive affect and managing negative affect. It helps us to manage stress that comes with suppression of emotions. An emotionally competent individual is able to appreciate, manage, and express the social and emotional aspects of one's life in ways that enable the successful management of life. Emotion eliciting social interaction is central to emotionally competent functioning. Emotional competence presumes emotional development. It suggests that due to differences in emotion-related capacities or abilities, that difference occur amongst individuals. Emotionally competent people also have better relationships as unsuitable emotions are least likely to be expressed, whereas apt emotions are expressed without any fear, and this is a potential source of difference between individuals. It is thus a capital and a resource to individuals. Emotional capital and emotional competence and emotional intelligence. Emotional competence helps individuals enhance one's personal, relational, and professional performances and motivates one to attain an overall increase in quality of life. Daniel Goleman suggested that emotional competence is an ability based on the understanding of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, which will be discussed, but in brief, it influences one's potential to learn the practical emotional competencies and to develop the emotional understanding necessary for overall happiness and life satisfaction. Such competency includes the development of the following skills: self, social, relational awareness, and management. Emotional competency appears to be an asset to individuals who possess, which acts as a contributory factor in greater life satisfaction. Emotional capital can also be understood as the set of emotional competencies that gives individuals and organizations the knack to use emotions to help them solve problems and live a more effective life, and the organization at facing economics and social changes and being successful and adapting to the world. It has an important impact on the performance of individual and one's well-being and should be taken as an important competency to be nurtured in people. It has been found to be an essential resource to an individual which aids him or her in achieving economic and social success. Emotional intelligence makes a person emotionally competent and acts as an emotional capital at one's disposal. Studies have found a positive relation with individual success. Emotionally intelligent people employ potentially intelligent ways of emotional reasoning in everyday life. Goleman in 1995 suggested emotional intelligence, or EI, is the ability to know and manage one's own emotions, recognize them in others, and to handle relationships. It includes skills such as being able to motivate oneself and persist in the face of frustrations, to control impulse and delay pleasure, to regulate one's moods and keep distress from hampering the ability to think, to hope, and to empathize. Goleman in 1998 differentiated emotional competency as the learned capability based upon emotional intelligence that results in outstanding performance at work. Management of one's emotions is an ability that builds on self-awareness. Individuals who are self-aware have the capacity to bounce back faster from life's setbacks and are able to cope faster with life challenges. Handling relationships is an art which helps in appreciating and managing emotions in others as well. Mayer and Salovey in 1997, in their understanding of EI, merged emotion with intelligence and suggested as reasoning that takes emotions into account. According to them, emotional intelligence is the ability to perceive emotions, to access and generate emotions so as to assist thought, to understand emotions and emotional knowledge, and to reflectively regulate emotions so as to promote emotional and intellectual growth. Skills in emotional competency. Dr. Sarni in 1999, in her book, The Development of Emotional Competence, suggested that emotional competence is the functional capability wherein an individual can reach one's goals after an emotion eliciting encounter. The author defines emotion as a building block of self-efficacy and described the importance of emotions as a set of skills achieved which can lead to the development of emotional competence. The book suggests that acquiring emotional competency is vital for building self-efficacy. The book uses an integrative approach on self-development with a strong social constructivist perspective. The emotional competence skills listed in the book are being aware of emotions of oneself, ability to distinguish and comprehend others' emotions, ability to use the vast expressions of emotions, capacity for empathic involvement, ability to differentiate subjective emotional experience from external emotion expression, adaptive coping with aversive emotions and distressing circumstances, awareness of emotional communication within relationships, and capacity for emotional self-efficacy. Emotional competence inventory. A brief history of the development of the ECI. The ECI is a 360-degree tool designed to assess the emotional competencies of individuals and organizations. It is based on emotional competencies identified by Dr. Daniel Goleman in working with emotional intelligence and on competencies from Hay-Megber's generic competency dictionary as well as Dr. Richard Boyazi's Self-Assessment Questionnaire. Hay-Megber's generic competency dictionary was originated by Lyle and Saint Spencer as documented in their book Competence at Worth and revised by psychologist David McLennan after an extensive review of the literature. It is based on over 20 years of research initiated by Dr. McLennan with his seminal article Testing for Competence Rather Than Intelligence. Hay-Megber and other researchers have established that every core competency in the dictionary reliably differentiates performance in a variety of organizations. The Self-Assessment Questionnaire was initially developed by Dr. Boyadziz in 1991 for use with MBA and executive students to assess competencies in the generic model of management used at the Weatherhead School of Management. Case Western Reserve University. The SAQ has shown a high degree of construct validity against a variety of behavioral and questionnaire measures. Since 1991, it has been used in numerous studies, including longitudinal research. Expanding upon Dr. Boyadzi's well-established evaluation measure, Dr. Boyadziz and Dr. Goleman developed a pool of items designed to capture the full spectrum of emotional competencies. Items were selected from this pool based on conceptual and logical considerations. Hay-Megber consultants further refined these items to reflect developmental scaling, which is characteristic of Hay-Megber's generic dictionary of competencies. Developmental scales were designed and target levels were identified based on expert opinion and prior studies. Boyadziz, Goleman and Ree in 1999 outlined the rationale for the clustering of organization of emotional intelligence competencies. This important paper presents a more detailed explanation for the development of the ECI and the theoretical structure upon which it is based. Emotional competence and culture. Emotional competence cannot be separated from cultural context. Emotional responses are rooted in the cultural norms and thus have a social meaning attached to it. An emotional script provided by culture helps individuals make an appropriate emotional response to situations. Thus, one can say an emotional competence is learned cultural messages about cultural values and norms, relationships, scripts regarding sex roles, and provide a self-definition to one's behavior. One example here could be of bowing culture in Japan. There are different kinds of bows, and the deeper the bow, the more the respect the individual shows to the other. This is an inference based upon cultural script. Many such differences exist amongst cultures. Comparing Indian and Western culture, one can see that in America, being an individualistic society, it is valued that one puts forward one's opinion and work towards personal growth. Whereas in a collectivistic culture, it is important that one listens to others and takes them into consideration. In such cultures, one is taught to control and regulate emotions more to maintain group harmony. Many researchers show that emotions are dependent on cognitive appraisals of experience. Both the cognitive processes and experience is culturally grounded as seen above. Thus, behavioral criteria of emotional competence could slightly differ from one cultural context to another. These cultural specific ways of behaving, therefore, are basic to the notion of EI. It is due to these reasons that individuals approach emotions differently across cultures, subcultures, within societies, or families. Emotional socialization in different cultures. Emotional socialization processes help individuals understand the appropriate emotion to be displayed and may be experienced in different situations. So, one can say ES processes help in regulation of emotions in members of different communities. It is important to realize the role and influence of cultural context in building emotional competence. Culture values and norms shall shape the manner in which competence is likely to be defined, which shall have an impact on the pattern in which individuals experience different emotions and their corresponding expression, and also how the self is understood. Very little literature can be found on cross-cultural study of emotional development. One such study by Matsumoto and Kishimoto 1983 pointed that Japanese children 4 to 9 years of age tend to perform poorer than American children in emotion recognition. Chia and Rubin in 2004 did a comparison of emotional reactions and ES practices of Euro-American and mainland Chinese mothers of 3 to 6-year-old children in view of their likely responses to their child's aggression toward and withdrawal from peers. Mainland Chinese mothers reported teaching involving training, discussion, and education strategies to both child behaviors, especially for child aggression, and Euro-American mothers preferred non-supportive strategies like punishment, force-appropriate behavior, and threat, etc. to aggressive behavior, and seeking information if the child withdrew. Thus, one can see socialization during early years of life shapes the emotional competency of an individual. Studies show that the beliefs and attitude of mothers or significant others in the environment have an impact on the young children's abilities to feel, express, and control emotions. These further vary from culture to culture, and understanding of culture, in fact, acts as a social clue as to when children in different cultures are expected emotional control based on the cultural model of emotional competence unique to their culture. Researchers have also indicated that different cultures tend to socialize their children to regulate their emotions according to their own cultural script. For example, studies have shown that accounts American mothers believe that it is essential to focus on their children's successes, while Chinese mothers believed it is important to provide discipline for their children. We have seen above that emotions play an important role in interpersonal relationships and in how the social bonds are. Emotional exchange has the potential to influence the social consequences of interaction, which could result in either maintaining or enhancing positive relationships, or in becoming a source of antagonism and discord. These depend upon the emotional regulation strategies people adopt. Different cultures have prescribed rules for emotional regulation. Cultures also influence the process of gender socialization by having distinct normative sets for masculine and feminine roles. It is nonetheless to say that cultures might also differ in the defining of emotional competency for the two genders. One example could be of India, where the way to express emotions for a similar situation differ for men and women. For example, a woman should express her anger and disappointment by withdrawing or crying, whereas men should express anger through shouting or physical fight. Studies on cultural difference in emotional competency should also look into how within different cultures there are different gender-related emotional competencies. Emotional competency in Indian culture context. Indian culture teaches certain cultural values like respecting elders, concern for others, and fulfilling one's responsibility. These concerns, along with moral values of nonviolence, kindness, and generosity, provide the basis for emotional expression and responsibly. The Indian view of emotional intelligence is based on the rich traditional, religious, and philosophical context, focusing on the role of family and society in influencing one's emotions. Social concerns like well-being of others and fulfilling one's duty plays a dominant part of achievement goals, along with social skills such as respecting elders or helping others, constituting the significant means of achieving these goals as suggested by Dalal et al. In 1988. Similarly, the concept of shared locus of control is more important and accorded greater value in collectivistic cultural groups. The Indian understanding of self can be considered of a more interdependent self. In Indian thought, self is considered as an experiencing subject or a center or an object of awareness. Yoga and meditation are considered means to discover the true self. The Indian self is built around we, our, and us, in contrast to the Western I and my, that is, the self exists in relation to the social context. Emotional learning is considered as a lifelong process of looking inward and towards the discovery of true self. The understanding of emotional intelligence in the Indian scenario is viewed in a different way from the Western perspective, which puts an emphasis on hierarchical attainment of abilities, which is distinct from traits like warmth, sociability, etc. Summary: Thus, one sees emotional competence as an important ability of an individual to identify, interpret, and manage one's and others' emotions. Emotional intelligence acts as a resource to individual and has implications on effective relationships, quality of life, and life satisfaction. The construction of emotional competency in terms of behavioral skills would differ from one cultural context to other, depending upon the emotional cultural script provided by it.